represent the Association of Amherst Students.
And my name is Allison Tennant. I'm also a senior who uses she, her pronouns. I'm here representing the Amherst Climate Action Group, and we've worked hard as a group to bring you this event, Student Voices from the Front Line of Climate Change, to raise awareness about the Climate Action Plan and the effects of climate change in our community.
We first want to acknowledge that we are on Nunatak, Pecumtuck, and Nipmuc homelands, and as we consider the impacts of climate change on land and people in the United States and worldwide, we must acknowledge the damage that colonizers have historically done to Native communities. We are really appreciative of all the student labor that has gone into this event. So quickly before we continue, we have representatives from the Direct Action Coordinating Committee here to quickly discuss the organizational processes that went into this event. If you all are ready. Cool.
Hi, everyone. My name is Christina Ray. I'm a senior. I'm here as a representative of DAC, Direct Action Coordinating Committee, just to give a small statement about this event and its involvement with DAC and how you can get involved as well. So there are a lot of misconceptions about what DAC is and isn't. We want to make it clear that DAC was originally founded by myself and other women of color and one trans Black man with radical intentions and a commitment to direct action. DAC is not a reformist organization. We are having some upcoming general meetings to clarify this point and to make the distinction that while we have worked with CAP, we are not affiliated. CAP is no longer a subcommittee of DAC. So we want to make that known. We support CAP and its members and to continue doing what it's doing, which is important and useful work, and to potentially do that work while also being DAC members committed to the DAC mission. But again, CAP will no longer be a part of DAC as a subcommittee. This was decided upon by several DAC founding members over time. If you want more information, this will be discussed in further detail at our next meeting. You're encouraged to like us on Facebook to get more information. Thank you so much for coming out. This is a really important event, and we just wanted to make our position clear. So we hope you enjoy the event, and we hope you come out and make sure that your politics go beyond reform. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. When we're faced with such an overwhelming crisis as climate change, it's more important than ever to be here and come together building community. The latest UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report said that we have until 2030, which is only 12 years, to reduce our emissions by 50% if we want to avoid global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and if we have any chance of limiting the effects of climate change. In addition, our natural gas fossil fuel infrastructure here at Amherst largely affects our lower income, immigrant, and people of color Massachusetts neighbors.
The latest National Climate Assessment released this past Friday laid out the staggering effects that current rates of climate change will have on the economy, health, and infrastructure of America alone. The country is not prepared to respond to the increase of fire, flood, drought, and extreme weather expected here and around the world. Yet the current federal administration refuses to acknowledge these dangers.
But luckily, it's not too late. Amherst has the opportunity to take a step towards mitigating our contribution to climate change by adopting the Climate Action Plan and committing to carbon neutrality. By being here tonight, we show that climate change is an important issue to our campus, and we ask our administration to adopt the Climate Action Plan at the January Board of Trustees meeting and take meaningful action before 2030.
Tonight you will hear first from Jim Brassard about the Climate Action Plan, and then you will hear from students who have been personally impacted by climate change in their home communities. There will also be some time at the end for you all to share your own stories if you choose.
We are so excited to see you all here tonight and really hope that this can be a step towards building a fossil fuel-free community at Amherst. To show your support for the Climate Action Plan, we have a petition in the back that we would encourage you to sign if you haven't already. We also have an email list for those of you who would like to get more involved. And now we'll get started with Jim Brassard to talk about the Climate Action Plan.
Thank you for that introduction. I'm Jim Brassard, Chief of Campus Operations. and I'm joined tonight by Laura Drucker, who is the Director of the Office of Environmental Sustainability. I'll keep my remarks fairly short tonight because, you know, the operative word here is student voices, and I think that's what is the important thing to hear. But I thought to bring some context to the event tonight, it would be good to give you a little bit of background on the climate action plan that Amherst has been developing over the past 2 to 3 years. So just by way of history, back in 2015, the board made an announcement, and that announcement committed Amherst College to carbon neutrality and committed us to developing a plan to move towards that by a date certain. So on the basis of that aspiration, the administration pulled together what we call the Climate Action Task Force. It was comprised of students, faculty, and staff from all different backgrounds. And we approached this process not really knowing what the solution was. We knew that there was many different approaches towards developing a climate action plan. In essence, a roadmap, a strategy, a technical strategy, a financial strategy to meeting carbon neutrality. So the task force set about benchmarking with many other institutions and organizations around the country. And what we were able to see is a vast number of different approaches. Some institutions drilled down in a great level of detail and had a lot of specificity, and some were very vague in their approach, only to announce a goal and that we would essentially figure it out as we went along. And we knew we needed to be very specific. We knew we needed to develop a process that defined not only the goal, but also defined a pathway, a technical and financial feasible pathway forward. So initially, the Climate Action Task Force considered a number of approaches. One was, how far could we get with deep energy retrofits and conservation and changes in behaviors and making use of more efficient power sources? And the conclusion ultimately from that process was, we can effectively diet our way towards reducing our carbon, but we can only get so far. Our campus is inherently dependent right now upon carbon sources. That is, we burn natural gas, both in our boilers and in our cogeneration plant, to produce steam and to produce electricity and to produce hot water. And if you're still dependent upon that, conservation will only get you so far. The task force also took a deep dive into considering biofuels and biomass strategies. But there was a number of considerations there, the location that we lived in, whether we could truly have a fuel source that was in equilibrium, truly carbon neutral, and also whether the technologies were sound and fundamental enough for us to be able to still maintain the operation of the college. And ultimately, the task force determined that biofuels or biomass was not an effective way. Each of these operations essentially put us in a position where the Climate Action Plan was considering the use of offsets. And the task force was emphatic, absolutely emphatic, in saying that offsets are not the way to achieve carbon neutrality. I'm sure there's a lot of knowledge in this room about offsets, but just at a very high level, there's a lot of skepticism, there's a lot of cynicism about whether offsets can truly get us to that point. Essentially, what we do in an offset mode is that we pay to pollute. We pay for somebody else to conserve to offset our own emissions. And these offsets are not traceable, are not accountable, and don't necessarily lead to the additionality of measures to reduce carbon. So that was quickly discounted as an approach. So as the deliberations continued, we realized we needed to think boldly, we needed to think aspirationally, we needed to think in a transformative way. And through our study, through engaging consultants, engineers, some of the talent on the campus, we identified another approach towards making our campus truly decarbonized. And that was through infrastructure transformation, more on that later. Secondly, around exclusive use of renewable energy sources for the campus. And thirdly, around deep conservation, deep energy conservation. And so that process is a complex process. It is a process that requires a lot of study and thought. And the task force realized that around 2017, we couldn't just put forth this approach, and the three approaches are renewables, transformation, and deep energy retrofits, without essentially doing the due diligence that was necessary to establish that it was financially feasible and technically feasible. And so over the past year, we have engaged a consultant, one of the top consultants in this realm in the country. The name of the consultant is the Inigo Group. And working with them and working through this analysis, both on a kind of a facilities and technical level, but also on a financial level, we were able to go through this due diligence and apply this strategy to our campus. And I think the very encouraging news from this process is that we determined that by converting the infrastructure, and I'll expand on that now, converting the infrastructure involves moving away from an inherently dependent fossil fuel approach to an electric-based infrastructure to ultimately replace our boilers and our cogeneration plant, install heat pumps. People know what heat pumps are? Yes, no? People heard about that? Okay, effectively a heat pump is a mechanical device that can work as an air conditioner in one mode and as a heater in a reverse mode. Essentially what it can do is either heat or cool, and it can impart that energy into a water source that can be distributed through our campus. So a heat pump is really the game changer here. Technology has improved over the past 10 years that makes heat pumps now very efficient, able to work in this climate with extreme weather conditions, and to do it efficiently. So the heat pump methodology essentially replaces our boilers with heat pumps, powers those heat pumps with renewable electricity, and then produces, rather than steam, it produces hot water or cold water that is circulated through our buildings. So you can see the major paradigm shift in the approach towards how we address our campus's energy needs. So, and then of course the third aspect of it is that with this consultant we needed to study and determine through our renovations, through new construction, just how much we could reduce the energy demand of our campus, again, to help make these heat pumps and this strategy more effective. So the upshot of all of this over the past year has been that we have a viable project, we have a viable strategy, we have a viable pathway to move us towards carbon neutrality over time. The Climate Action Task Force has set forth an aspirational goal of 2035 to achieve a truly carbon neutral campus without reliance on offsets. And that's very encouraging. I've been reviewing with Laura this strategy with senior staff colleagues, Biddy and the senior administration, and now we feel confident that the plan has been reviewed thoroughly, that it has been established through our consultants that it's viable, and we are now committed to bringing this forward to the trustees at their January meeting. And we have great hope that they agree with the strategies that have been set forth as a pathway towards carbon neutrality. So again, I want to be mindful of time. What I'll say is Laura and I will be staying after the event. We'll be able to address individual questions. But even beyond that, I suggest that you reach out to Laura and I, and our contact information is readily available. And we'll be more than happy to meet with individuals or groups and talk about some of the details of this process. I know I spoke at kind of perhaps too technical a level to be able to convey the details, but hopefully this gives you not only a sense of what the Climate Action Plan is, but the work that's happened and the commitment to moving forward on this. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Jim. We're going to turn the computer back on and then get started with Gabe.
All right. Hello, everybody. Can Can you guys hear me in the back there, everybody? Okay. Well, I'm glad to see you all here. People came. My name is Gabriel Acharte, and I'm a first year here at Amherst from Miami, Florida. I'd like to begin by giving a quick introduction to the climate situation today. I believe it is all too easy to overlook climate change and to allow it to settle to the back of our minds. We see it as an issue that will be easily reconciled by some smart people at a later date. The New York Times Magazine this summer, for the first time in the publication's recent history, devoted the entire edition to one article. This article is titled "Losing Earth" by Nathaniel Rich. It depicts the scope of the modern day climate crisis, laying out in brutal specificity that which lies ahead. I'll now read for you the first paragraph of this report. The world has warmed more than 1 degree Celsius since the Industrial Revolution. The Paris Climate Agreement, the non-binding, unenforceable, and already unheeded treaty signed on Earth Day in 2016, hoped to restrict warming to 2 degrees. The odds of succeeding, according to a recent study based on current emission trends, are 1 in 20. If by some miracle we are able to limit warming to 2 degrees, we will only have to negotiate the extinction of the world's coral reefs, sea level rise of several meters, and the abandonment of the Persian Gulf. The climate scientist James Hansen has called 2-degree warming a prescription for long-term disaster. Long-term disaster is now the best-case scenario. 3-degree warming is a prescription for short-term disaster, forests in the Arctic, and the loss of most coastal cities. Robert Watson, a former director of the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has argued that 3-degree warming is the likely and the realistic minimum. 4 degrees, Europe in permanent drought, vast areas of China, India, and Bangladesh claimed by desert. Polynesia swallowed by the sea, the Colorado River thinned to a trickle. The American Southwest left largely uninhabitable. The prospect of a 5-degree warming has prompted some of the world's leading climate scientists to warn of the end of human civilization. The situation today is dire. I read this paragraph not to incite fear, but to push our community towards action. The story I'm about to tell is much larger than just the island on which I live. It is a story of humanity's future. Our fate as a people lies in the balance. This is the point where we decide if we are just another species relegated to extinction or if we overcome this great challenge. It is up to the decisions made now by each and every one of us to dictate the future of our Earth. Irreparable loss and damage already lie in hand for us and our progeny. We are now left with the task of mitigating the damage to come as best we can and maintaining the human spirit of hope throughout. Now for my story. I live on Miami Beach. It's a small barrier island off the coast of South Florida. I grew up in a quaint house on Lagorce Drive and have lived my entire life within these few miles. Just like many of you, I drove to school every morning, I studied, and I spent time with my family and friends. Every place in Miami holds a memory for me. The corner of Prairie and 20th is the place where I went on my first date. There's a golf course behind my house where my brother, sister, and I used to sneak out and see friends, and the beach on 72nd is the last place I saw all of my family together before leaving here for Amherst. Every single place in Miami is saturated with memories and meaning. It has become sacred for me. In my time growing up there, I have watched as climate change has slowly grown to consume more and more of the place I love through sea level rise. I remember one day going to the grocery store. I would have been around 10 or 12 by this point, and I remember seeing warning notices of the infrastructure projects to come. The roads would be closed or under construction for the next few months to both raise them and install pumps. The ever-increasing flooding had become unsustainable for the local businesses, and emergency services could no longer reliably make it where they were needed in times of heavy flooding. All of South Florida lies on a bed of limestone. It forms a porous aquifer that provides us with all our fresh water. The same aquifer allows the tide waters to seep up from the ground and creates devastating flooding across South Florida. It does not matter how inland someone may be, if the tides rise high enough, the water will come up from the ground. The pumps on Miami Beach run almost constantly to fight this, but no number of pumps can keep out the sea, and we can only raise roads so high. Already the storefronts lie nearly buried. The roads cast shadows. Hurricanes have grown to take their toll as well. I find myself fleeing my home or preparing to do so more and more often. Mandatory evacuations occur along many parts of the coast, and others in high-risk zones are also recommended to evacuate. For however long the hurricane and repairs take, my entire city drops everything it's doing and flees. These hurricanes are coming with greater ferocity and increased concentrations due to warmer seas caused by climate change. After the hurricane passes, everyone returns home and begins to rebuild. The most recent hurricane was Irma. Multiple trees fell on my home, others saw their houses destroyed, power lines were down for days, and I did not have classes for a week after the storm. Thousands of Puerto Ricans saw their homes demolished and fled to Miami. It would be another 11 months until they would have electricity again. Miami is living on borrowed time. The most conservative climate projections agree that within the century, regardless of emissions cuts, most or all of South Florida will be lost. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration predicts an upper limit of 6.5 feet of sea level rise within the century. Miami Beach has an elevation of 4 feet. The greater city of Miami has an elevation of 6.5 feet. The home in which my siblings were born and the city where I made nearly every memory of my life up to now will be gone within a few decades. I will be one of millions of future climate refugees in the United States alone. It is imperative to note that I and all these other speakers here before you are just the beginning. I'm speaking today because I cannot, in good conscience, with what I now know, allow the rest of the United States and the world to fall as Miami will. Everything I do, regardless of how happy I am, is always tinged with a sense of loss, a sense of hopelessness. It lies as a heavy blanket over all of my city. Everyone feels it on them constantly. Everyone knows it is there and does their best to ignore it. The only problem is that you can't help but notice how the waves splash right onto the balcony of the restaurant you're eating in, or how road after road after road has become so inundated to make it nearly unpassable due to a storm surge. You cannot help but think about how everything you are seeing and everything you love will be gone. The decision to forfeit your home has been made for you decades before you were born, and now you will live with the repercussions. That is the story of Miami. That is the story of my home. I tell this story not to sound alarmist or devoid of hope, but to push people towards action. I'm here along with AAS, DAC, and all the other groups sponsoring this event because we hold hope. I believe in the United States, and I believe in the greater global community to get this one right. It just takes a little push from people like us and from schools like ours to do what is right, even when it is not easy, especially when it is not easy. At Amherst, this means passing the Climate Action Plan with a more aggressive timeline. The current plan, with a more aggressive timeline. The current plan aims for carbon neutrality by 2035. By this point, the damage will already have been done, and our Earth will be charted for a course well above 2 degrees. The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has given humanity approximately 12 years from the report's release a few weeks ago to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. Humanity may have passed the point of leaving this unscathed, but we now must mitigate the damage with the utmost urgency. At 1.5 and even 2 degrees, there remains hope, and hope cannot be surrendered. I do not want the world to live with the weight that comes from living in a place without a future, a place like Miami. I want to now fast forward to the end of the New York Times report I referred to earlier in my speech. I believe there is not a more fitting conclusion to all that I have said. Human nature has brought us to this place. Perhaps human nature will one day bring us through. Rational argument has failed in a rout. Let irrational optimism have a turn. It is also human nature, after all, to hope. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much to Gabe. I quickly we're getting this to work again, want to show a video that he gave us from the last hurricane and just how high the water was. All right. Up next, we have Kelly.
My name is Kelly Missett. I'm a senior, I'm a French major, and an environmental studies major here. Tonight I will talk about wildfires. My family moved to Missoula, Montana when I was 17. Before I moved to Montana, I knew about climate change, but I didn't really understand what that meant. Climate change felt really distant to me because people on the news at that point were still talking about it as a problem that mostly affected polar bears. Living in Montana, though, made climate change very real to me because I experienced wildfires for the first time. Wildfires are a normal and necessary component of Montana's ecosystem, but climate change and decades of fire suppression are making fires more frequent and severe. In Montana, 2017's fire season was particularly bad. Wildfires burned over 1.4 million acres in Montana alone. One of these fires was the Lolo Peak Fire, which burned almost 54,000 acres just a few miles south of Missoula, my town. The fire is pictured up on the screen. 3,000 people from Lolo, the next town south, were evacuated from their homes. A few houses burned, and one firefighter died after a burning tree crushed him. For weeks, the smoke from that fire, and even the smoke from distant fires in Canada and Washington, sank into our river valley. Stepping outside into the smoke was surreal. It looked and smelled and tasted like I was living in the Industrial Revolution. I couldn't see the mountains. I couldn't even see a few blocks down the street. Everything was gray and sooty and dark. My little brother couldn't go outside to play anymore by mid-August last year because he has asthma and the air pollution was really bad. Fire smoke can be very serious for children and the sick and the elderly. My family and our house were fortunately safe, but we still felt sad and angry. The places we used to go to walk our dogs every day were blackened, and so even though our house wasn't burnt, because of this, we felt like part of our home was. And it made us sad to know that the places we loved were going to keep burning, and to know that it's only going to get worse. With climate change, summers in Montana are getting hotter. During winters, there is less snow. The land is drying up and it will burn. Even though Missoula and my friends and family have been safe so far, I know more fires will come. I'm moving back there after graduation, and I can't stop wondering who and where will be next. I feel like I'm living through the apocalypse, and I really think about it all the time. And then I get angry. Climate change did not have to happen like this. People have known about it for decades. We've known about the impacts. We've known that my generation and our children will live in a world that will burn over. And we could have stopped it. But governments and businesses have been too worried about their own greed and their own power to help transition us away from burning fossil fuels. Even Amherst College hasn't yet put money towards being 100% renewable, even though we've had a draft climate action plan, and even though we have a $2 billion endowment to make it a reality. The Board of Trustees must review, approve, and fund the climate action plan at their January meeting. Amherst College needs to do its part, and we have run out of time to wait. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Up next, we have Steph.
Hello, everyone. My name is Stephanie Masadi, and I'm a first year here at Amherst College. I am from Long Island, New York. My hometown is about 6 miles from the ocean and 25 miles from Manhattan. Climate change has affected Long Island, as with most places, in many ways. In recent years, rising sea levels and the increased frequency and severity of storms have likely been the most evident effects. An event that sparked the realization of climate change as a real problem for the people of Long Island was Hurricane Sandy, also known as Superstorm Sandy, in 2012. Hurricane Sandy itself was not caused by climate change. However, climate change dramatically heightened its effects. The storm brought mass flooding, fires, and power outages. A large amount of infrastructure built without the assumption that these storms would frequently occur was destroyed. The city of Long Beach, which is about 6 miles from my hometown, is situated on the water and was devastated by this storm. Many homes were completely destroyed, and the storm caused $150 million in damage to the city's infrastructure, including the water and sewer treatment plants. For months, people in Long Beach were collecting food, clothes, toiletries, and anything else people were willing to donate, since many people lost everything. Some even lost their lives. I remember feeling so fortunate to have only lost power. The storm felt even more devastating because its effects were unanticipated by the people of Long Island. I even remember people choosing not to evacuate when they were strongly urged to do so by local government officials. Afterwards, these people realized their mistake. These effects were unanticipated because such storms had never been so damaging. Hurricanes are not the only storms that have become more severe. My dad, who also grew up on Long Island, told me that the intense house-shaking thunder we now experience during almost every rainstorm occurred only about once or twice a year when he was a kid. This was not that long ago. Long Island is a very densely populated region with significant infrastructure, making it vulnerable to these harsh natural disasters and likely prone to long-term risks of rising sea levels. Partly due to these long-term risks, my family has considered the possibility of relocating away from the shoreline at some point in the future. When I think about the current impacts of climate change, I often feel hopeless because of the irreversible damage that we've already caused. Nonetheless, I do not allow this emotion to prevent me from taking urgent action. We all have a responsibility to take better care of the environment, especially when we have the knowledge of how to do so. I chose to speak here today not because I believe my experience is unique. In fact, I believe everyone is affected by climate change in some way, and everyone can do something to prevent more environmental abuse. I support the Climate Action Plan because I believe it is our responsibility to lessen our carbon consumption when we have the resources to do so. People often believe that though they should help decrease carbon emissions, their personal cutback would be minuscule and widespread action and policy would be more effective. If the climate action is approved, then Amherst College will be institutionally contributing to curbing carbon emissions. I believe that the Climate Action Plan is a necessary step for Amherst College to take in order to address our responsibility involving climate change and hopefully to influence other institutions to do the same. Thank you for listening to my story.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm from Santa Barbara, California. So yeah, I'm just here to share my experience, how climate change has affected me. So we've had a lot of fires in Southern California, and in the first, growing up, first few years of my life, they were pretty sparse. Every 4 years, 5 years, something like that. And then in the last 5 or 10 years, it's just been fire after fire after fire. And just all these houses are being burned in my town, and anybody who lives in the foothills, like this is my town here. It's kind of like in this little valley next to the ocean, and anybody who lives close to the mountains is constantly concerned that their house is going to burn. And recently, the most recent fire was last year, the Thomas Fire, and that was just one of the worst fires in California's history, in terms of just deadly and also a ton of land. This is a picture of the Thomas Fire. As you can see, it's just getting really close to my town. I think, burning houses. And what was really tough about this one is it burned a lot of the foliage that was supporting the mountainside. So all that land right there normally is supported by the foliage against the hill, and that is what prevents mudslides. Unfortunately, this fire burned enough of it that we had a really awful mudslide last winter. So I was away at school in the fall, and I'm hearing these reports about just the terrible smoke, the fire, houses burning. My whole family is walking around town wearing my younger brother, his school got canceled for about a week and a half. And I'm sitting here, what can I do? what can we do, right? I'm just stuck here. And finally I get to go back for winter break, and the fire's pretty much out, and then we start getting these rains. And one morning, I'm at my friend's house, and they tell me that there's been like a terrible flood in Montecito, which is the town like right next to mine. And like there was just like 5 feet of mud just coming down and sweeping houses off their foundations. It pretty much destroyed the entire city. And I just remember I was at my friend's house, and my friend's mom is like a real estate agent, and she was calling her friend Rebecca, making sure she's okay, and no one was picking up, and she died that night. And in total, 21 people died that night. It was like 3 a.m., and then the mud came, and people didn't know what to expect. And it just goes to show, like, these people that are, dying, being affected by this, they're not just anyone. Like, these are friends, family, coworkers, and yeah, that's pretty much the story. I just want to say I'm not really normally involved with any of this stuff, like student action, whatever. I just wanted to show my support because this hits home with me, and I care a lot about this.
Great. Up next, we have Josue.
Awesome. Hi guys, my name is Josue Sanchez. I'm from Houston, Texas. Specifically, I'm from Southeast Houston, which is a predominantly Latino neighborhood with amazing food, rich culture, and warm people. Back home, we're pretty familiar with extreme weather, with 110-degree summers, very intense humidity, and regular seasonal floods. We're pretty, used to it. But the summers have been getting increasingly hotter, and the floods have been getting way worse. It doesn't help that the city's actually built on a swamp and that the humidity intensifies the heat. But as most of you know, in August 2017, Hurricane Harvey hit Houston. The city experienced a devastating flood. Homes were destroyed, the city was submerged, and lives were lost. I left for my first year at Amherst the day before the hurricane hit. And it was really hard because I didn't know if my family was going to be okay when I came back, or whether I was even going to have a home to come back to. So yeah, that's honestly one of the most difficult things I've ever had to do. Thankfully, my family was okay, and my home was safe, but I do have many friends who lost most of their belongings and lost their homes. Despite all that destruction though, many people in Houston came together and helped each other. It was an amazing display of solidarity. This gave me hope for the future. If we can come together and help each other after the hurricanes, why can't we come together and stop them from getting worse in the first place? We as a community need to stop being complacent. No one is going to solve this problem if we don't take the first steps. I chose to speak about my experience because I believe it's important for Amherst to do its part in fighting the destructive power of climate change. Thank you.
Great. Up next, we have Danielle. Ooh.
Hello, everyone. I'm pretty sure I'm Daniel Ahmed, from an international freshman from Pakistan. I'm pretty sure my fellows have already embedded a lot of factual evidences for you people to remember. I'll be honest, I don't have factual evidences or presentations for you today. What I do have with me is a message that I believe is essential to our cause of combating climate change. Amherst College is a beautiful place. It is tolerant, it is accepting, it is understanding, it is diverse. It is my second home. I never thought I could have a home free from all the plagues of convention and stereotypes that were there back in Pakistan. However, there is a slight problem to this narrative. Outside the boundaries of this college is a world that is not so accepting, that is not so tolerant, that has divides on the basis of caste, color, religion, creed, gender, and whatnot. Amongst all these divides is a common factor. And that common factor is the imbalance of power. It has always been the powerful, the elite, the ruling, the rich, who have continued to oppress the weak, the poor, the helpless. You must be wondering why in my very few minutes of climate change talk do I continue to talk about poverty. I will get to that very soon. This is because it has been psychologically proven that people do not take action about climate change because they are not ready to make a change in the present for benefits that might be there in the future. When I talk about poverty and how it intertwines with climate change, I wish to clarify that the impact, the consequences, and the disastrous effects are not into the future. They're not going to happen by 2035. They're not going to happen for your children to see. They're happening, and they're happening right now. You must be, I'm pretty sure you in this beautiful Frost Library in one of the finest colleges of the country, we ask ourselves, what impacts? I'm pretty sure we have already seen a lot, but for those who perhaps still think, what effects? In all these years of my living, I haven't seen any effects of climate change. I'll tell you why, because I like to assume that most of us are from well-off families, from privileged backgrounds, and even if not from privileged backgrounds, privileged enough to have an education in one of the finest colleges in the world. You know who's not privileged enough? Poor people on the streets of the US. Poor people on the street of countries like Pakistan. Third world countries where I have seen helpless, suppressed people struggling to cope up with the effects of climate change and dying where they have absolutely no knowledge of what is happening to them. When I talk about climate change, I talk about them. When I talk about climate change, I talk about the situation when drastically extreme winter weathers happen and we stay in the centrally air-conditioned rooms of Amherst College in our expensive, cozy clothing, then we fail to notice any change in the winter at all, whereas people out there in the street of countries and communities like Pakistan struggle to survive. They die in that winter weather in societies where fundamental rights like clothing and shelter aren't that fundamental. They struggle to survive and they die, whereas we are completely comfortable and fail to see those minor differences in the temperature. When ecosystems are drastically affected in the future and we expect food shortages or food differences to arise up, we with our financial resources will still definitely be well off, managing to get all the basic nutrition we need, whereas people out in the street of countries like Pakistan, I have seen them struggle for 18 years of my life, will sacrifice on their hunger so they can feed their children and even then continue to die and starve on the streets, whereas we sit here and continue to decide, is climate change worth discussing? And then when climate change, as it has already been proved, leads to a drastic increase, a widespread increase in infectious diseases like malaria, dengue, and cholera, we with our vaccinations and our health care facilities will definitely be fine off. But people in the poorest part of the US and the poorest part of the world will continue to take the burden of climate change. And when all that happens, the ruling, the powerful, the elite, and the super powerful business people above us all fail to see that because their profits skyrocket. Their goods production are higher than ever before, and honestly, their businesses flourish of activities that actually lead to climate change. The gist of the message is this: it is beyond us to discuss if climate change is a problem. It is beyond us to discuss if we should take action for climate change, because at this point in the existence of humanity, we have an obligation to every single individual who is probably not as privileged as us, an obligation. And they look up to us to take the initiative that will potentially revolutionize the generations to come, that will be the change that will combat climate change. Thank you.
That was awesome, Daniel. Thank you so much. Up next, we have Katie.
Hi, I'm Katie and I'm from Wellesley, Massachusetts. And I think after what Daniel said, what I'm about to say is going to sound very, very trivial. And as we all know, climate change is a matter of life and death. And there are people all around the world who are impacted by it in ways that I can't imagine each and every day. And it's their safety and their livelihood. But what I'm going to talk about is snow. So, like I said, I'm from Massachusetts. And our winters are very strange now. I think a lot of us, so I've lived in Massachusetts my entire life, and a lot of us do now to go to college. So I think if you've come from California, if you've come from other parts of the country or the world, you might not understand how strange our winters are now, but they are. So I want to ask people who have been here for maybe a decade, for maybe like 15 years, 20 years, to remember when we used to be able to skate all winter on ponds. Because I remember growing up, that's a picture from when my brother was a senior in high school. We used to be able to skate all winter. There's a pond behind my house. It would freeze, and about, I think this picture was taken about 10 years ago, it skated enough for my brother to make a Bills Pond Hockey League and skate on, and they would play pond hockey outside from, I think, December all the way until March when the pond would melt. Now, the last time we were able to skate for more than about a week at a time was that winter. When I go home now, most of the time we're waiting. So we're waiting, we're like, the pond's almost there, the pond's almost there, and then we have a 70-degree day, and you're like, well, you can't go skating, you're gonna fall through. And I think that just seeing the way in which that's changed, it's a concrete difference in what it means to live in Massachusetts. And it means that the home that a lot of us share is fundamentally changing in ways that are trivial, like playing pond hockey or making snow castles, which are really fun, but also much more serious, because we're fundamentally changing the place that we call our home. And I think when we walk outside in the Northeast and we see a 70-degree day in January, that feels alien. That feels like we've created a place that we don't even know, and a place that's a lot of our home. And it's weird. It means that when it's, when we have like huge snowstorms in November, which we just did, and then they melt in a day, and then it's raining, and then it's like 70 degrees, that's fundamentally weird. And that's not the way that I remember from my childhood, and that's not the way that I know that Massachusetts is. So just to back up this whole, so I feel like fundamentally, I feel that our winters have changed, but it's not just me that feels that. Because the United States Historical Climatology Network has indicated that the Northeast has been warming at an average rate of nearly 0.26 degrees Celsius per decade since 1970, which means that the Northeast is having temperatures that are rising faster than the average for the world, and that winter temperatures have been rising faster than summer temperatures at a rate of 0.7 degrees per decade. So that means that by the end of the century, large areas of the Northeast are projected to lose up to half their snow-covered days. And annual precipitation in the form of rain is expected to increase by 30 degrees in the winter. So a lot of those scenes, like skating on ponds and making igloos, are going to go away. Because you might still have precipitation, but it's going to be rain. And rain melts snow really fast. And while that's, obviously it's not the most serious issue involved in climate change, like there's a lot more serious issues, it's sad. And it means that we're losing something that we can't get back, and we're losing a part of our region that I've experienced that if I have kids, they probably won't. And that's really sad. And far more scary than that, we're fundamentally changing our ecosystem. And we don't really know how that's gonna look. So I know I didn't grow up in North Carolina, and I didn't expect to have the climate of North Carolina when I'm 30. But that kind of looks like that's where we're going. And we don't know if like a lot of the plant lives and a lot of the animal lives that we have now are gonna be able to adapt to that. So that's very scary. And then more seriously than losing snow and losing skating, that's a map of Boston, which is the nearest big city to where I live. So by 2100, that's all the light blue areas are expected to be underwater, which is most of Boston. And in order to protect against that, I know that our governor has proposed to build a system of dams and levees around the city. And that means that instead of investing in public education and investing in public transportation and a lot of things that we could be using with taxpayer money, we're going to be spending a lot of money trying not to sink. And I think that, like, as Massachusetts residents, we all have like a vested interest in having our biggest city underwater, or trying to avoid that. So I just wanted to say that, again, I think that you've heard from people who've been touched by climate change in ways that I can't imagine. But we've all been touched by climate change, because whether or not you know it, you're living in Massachusetts weather that's been weird for probably like the last 5 years of my life. I know every year we talk about it being a weird winter, and by the 10th time it's a weird winter, it's just weird now. Like, it's not one winter. It's every winter is now different than it was when I was a young child. So again, thank you so much for your time. And one thing that we can do, obviously, is to support the Climate Action Plan, because we all live in Massachusetts. We all share weather that's become, very different than I think what a lot of us expected and what a lot of us are used to. And to avoid the very drastic predictions that are expected in terms of Boston and in terms of the winters that we're expecting to see, we need to take action. And I think that the biggest action that we can do now as a college is to approve this plan. So thank you.
Up next, we have Rachel. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for hanging in there. My name is Rachel Cohen. I'm a senior. I use she, hers pronouns. And I'm from Danville, California, which is a town in the San Francisco East Bay. This past week, I was home, and it was the first time I'd been home in almost a year. I live at the base of a mountain called Mount Diablo. That's Mount Diablo. That's my dog. And it's beautiful. I grew up hiking in the foothills and climbing on boulders at a park on the mountain that we call Rock City, letting my dog run up and down the hills while I watched from below. I also learned how to run on Mount Diablo. I ran cross country in high school, and its foothills were our training site. And when I was 14, I ran from the bottom of the mountain all the way to the top. Last week, when I got home after so many months away, as I drove up the main street, how do I do this? Wait, Allison, how do I change this? There we go. Yeah. As I drove up the main street, that's the top left, I can normally see Mount Diablo. In the spring, I can see it clearly enough to see all the poppies on the mountainside, but you can't see it at all in that photo, and that's because it's completely obscured by smoke. So I'm sure most, if not all of you, heard about the devastating campfire in Butte County, California that happened over the past few weeks. Butte County is the county in red on the California state map. My county, Contra Costa County, is what the blue arrow is pointing to. The campfire devastated Butte County over the past couple weeks. I'd read about it here at Amherst before hopping on the plane to go home, and of course it sounded horrible, but hearing about the fire from 3,000 miles away did nothing to prepare me for what Northern California was actually experiencing as the fire raged and destroyed people's homes, livelihoods, and took dozens of lives. The campfire was the deadliest campfire in over a century, or was the deadliest fire in over a century. At one point, it was moving at over a football field per second. It destroyed hundreds of homes and killed 88 people. The smoke from the fire inundated the Bay Area, resulting in the Bay Area having the worst air quality in the entire world during the week leading up to Thanksgiving. If I went outside for even like 10 minutes, I would feel nauseous and dizzy and would have to go inside to catch my breath. All the people displaced from their homes are living in shelters made in parking lots, and they can't go inside. The homeless population in San Francisco, which is the largest homeless population in the country, also can't go inside. The smoke was detrimental to everybody's health, particularly those people that suffer from respiratory illnesses. It's easy to look at a tragedy like this and recognize how horrific it is and want to donate to the cause, which you can. Butte County needs all the help it can as they try to rebuild, but not to contextualize the disaster. Unfortunately, California is all too familiar with the burn, smoke, try to rebuild process. Just last year, the Sonoma County fires took dozens of homes, one of which being the home of my friend Sydney Weil, who was an Amherst student and graduated last May. During my lifetime, I've seen the season during which Mount Diablo is green go from months to only weeks, and then watched its brown grass burn itself during my senior year of high school. I left California for Amherst at the height of our drought, and I saw the trees in Central Valley die as less and less water fell during our winters. During my time at Amherst, I received countless emails from the Office of Student Affairs reaching out to check in because of fires in California. If Amherst really cares about me, other students from California, and our connections to our homes, sending meager emails once every 2 months is not going to cut it. I want to see Amherst make a commitment to mitigating climate change, the root of fear I feel in my home and for my home when I'm here 3,000 miles away. Amherst, please commit to carbon neutrality. The Amherst College mission statement states, Amherst College educates students of exceptional potential from all backgrounds so that they may seek, value, and advance knowledge, engage the world around them, and lead principled lives of consequence. Amherst, we are here, sharing our stories, begging that you engage with the world around you. Show that you care about climate change, the millions of lives it is affecting and will affect, particularly lives of people of color and people from low-income communities. Be consequential. Thank you.
So thank you so much for sticking in. We just have one more speaker, so I'll introduce Asa.
Hi everyone, my name is Asa. I'm a junior. I study political science and computer science. I use he or they as pronouns. I don't really have a preference. Thank you so much for being here. Unlike all the wonderful speakers before me, I didn't have a time to write up my speech because I just signed up last night, so apologies for you have to hear my improvisation, but I'll try to make it as fun as possible. So I'm gonna talk about air pollution in China. I come from a city called Chengdu, and before, okay, the change didn't go through, so I need to, yeah. So in case you wonder where the heck that is, it is in here, in central China, and the more famous cities are here, Beijing and Shanghai. So just a rough picture of where that is. And also, unfortunately, this map is a map of air pollution in China. And if you can see the legend in here, it is saying what is the equivalence? Like if you smoke one day of this kind of air quality in China, how much pieces of cigarettes does it equate to? So if we can see that if you live in Beijing, you are basically smoking like a pack of cigarettes every day just for sake of being in Beijing for one day. And my city is slightly better. It's like 10 pieces of cigarettes, and that's still very horrible. So yeah, right. So I'm not a smoker, but I'm kind of a smoker, I guess, just because I live in China. So yeah, so this is what it is. And from this side of the picture, you know, like here are all the civil protests against air pollution in China. Everybody, I think most people know that since 1989, not a lot of Chinese people take it to the streets. So you know things are horrible when people start taking it to the streets and protesting the government. And here we go, we have them. And we have the government, of course, cracking down on all of them. So yeah, and yeah, let's go back to the slide. Oh, sorry. Yes. So so this is just a stark contrast over what does a clear day look like in Beijing and what is a polluted day look like in Beijing. So this one is, so there's an index called air quality index, and it is measuring how much pollutant there is in the units like what volume of air. And here we are looking at something like 600 or 700. And can anyone guess what is the average air pollution index here at Amherst? How many times cleaner are air here than in Beijing? Just random guess. 100? It turns out to be 5 to 10. So yeah, so the air there is like 50 times more polluted than here in Amherst. So here this is this giant geographical contrast between different parts of the world, like how air pollution affects different parts of the world. And China is known to be the world factory, so that means most of the goods and services and products we enjoy here, the pollution goes to the developing nations. And these pollutions are now moving out of China because of raising labor costs into more developing countries like Bangladesh, Indonesia, Thailand, and all these countries, and we'll very soon see this kind of things in these countries as well, because there are very poor labor or like environmental standards over there. So yeah, so if you live in this kind of environment, what would you do? Like, except for just committing suicide, which is basically what you're doing, like slowly. What would you do? Like put on a mask, maybe? Yeah, or like buy an air purifier. I don't know if anyone knows what that is, but that's a big thing in China. Yeah, but the unfortunate thing is normal masks just simply doesn't work. You need a very special industrial standard professional mask produced by 3M company, and that is the one thing that is gonna work. I had a picture up there about that, but let me try to reload this. Let me try to reload this presentation and see if it will come up in there. Sorry. Oh, does it work? No, it's not controlled from this company.
No.
Oh, is it not?
It is.
Sorry.
Here, I think it's, I don't know if it will do anything.
It's not changing here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think we can get it to do that.
Sorry for the technical.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay, try scrolling through now.
great. Oh yeah, here we go. Yes. So this is a normal. This is a thing that you will imagine if you think about a mask. But this one doesn't work because the particles are simply, the polluting particles are simply too small and can pass through like all these little gaps between the diapers of this mask. And this is a human hair. And the kind of pollutants we're talking about is just this small, like the kind of pink ball. And it's not just gonna go into your repository system. It's also gonna go into your lungs, your blood circulation. So basically, whatever pollutant you see there in the air is going to go into your body and also carry with it all these kind of viruses and heavy metals. And I was so terrified when I first learned about this. But the even more terrifying thing is that there's no escape, there's no runaway from it. I first learned about it when I was in middle school, like 10th, 11th grader. But even if I know about air pollution, I don't know how to deal with it. Like all these professional industrial level masks are sold out once people realize what's going on. And there were no air purifiers at that time because nobody knew what this would happen. And I still have to go to school every day, and my school made me do outdoor exercises every day. So I have to breathe heavily, all this heavily polluted air, and without my consent, because consent wasn't even a thing back then. Yeah, so it was horrible, and I tried to hold my breath, but obviously, like you cannot do that for more than a minute. Yeah, that is so horrible. But yeah, but in 2 years, I don't know how to change the slide. Maybe this one. Oh, great. Yeah. So this is another picture of what it looks like. So this is so horrible that economics kick in and people start producing more masks, more purifiers, so things get better. I bought a purifier in my home, so I don't have to breathe this in my home, and that's a perfect excuse for me to stay at home and do video games without going out, right? But we also need to recognize that by virtue of being able to come here in the States, I'm a very privileged few in China. And there's a whole ton of people in China that does not have a home or that cannot afford to buy this kind of home appliances that purifies their air. And even worse, China is a growing country, and that is also true of most of the developing world. There are a lot of constructions going on, and all the construction workers have to be exposed in this kind of toxic air and doing heavy labor. So I have to not just breathe, but breathe heavily on a daily basis, all these kind of things. So that's why we're seeing like a huge surge of all kinds of cancer in the people who engage in heavy labor or construction work. And I believe that tells us that climate change is something that is the evil product of our economic system, and we also need to fix it with right incentives or right economic system. So what can Amherst do about this? I happen to work for one semester at Amherst Investment Office. And I believe Amherst has the ability to do this because Amherst, our huge endowment of $2 billion, have a global footprint, right? We don't just invest in US, we invest in Asia, we invest in Hong Kong, we invest in a lot of countries, in a lot of places and countries in the world. So if we can press our board of trustees to pass this kind of and social responsibility and environment resolution, that we do not invest in the heavily polluting industries, we do not invest in the geographies where air qualities are like this, in the construction or in all these kind of things that will contribute to negative environmental consequences. We believe we are able to make a change, and that change is happening. A lot of investment managers are actively divesting away from fossil fuel, from all these kind of negative ESG things. But Amherst is not like following along, or at least is not following along as a responsible liberal arts college should be. So we believe that is the importance, and that definitely could be done because people are doing it. Amherst just need to follow suit, and Amherst just need to do its own part. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much to all of our speakers. Can we give them one more round of applause? We'd now like to open up the floor for anyone who wants to take a few minutes to share a story or has been inspired. And while you're thinking about that, you can come up and line up over here. I'm just going to sum up kind of what we've been talking about. That climate change is scary, and it's kind of seeming like an abstract problem, but we've heard tonight how very real it is for a lot of members of our community. Amherst is a special place, and it's a small place, and when so many of our members of our community are hurting in this way, we have the responsibility to do something about it. There are things that you can do. Again, sign the petition in the back, add your email to get more involved. Write your federal and state representatives. These stories aren't unique, and as we prepare to live lives of consequence in the future, we must think about what that future will look like. The Climate Action Plan is one small step that Amherst needs to take. All right, if no one wants to speak, we'll go ahead and sum it up with Nishant.
Hey. So I just want to reiterate a couple of points in closing before we all leave. First off, what we've done here tonight, all of us, all of you who took your time this evening to come here, as well as all of our eloquent and inspiring speakers, what we've done is a really important step. We're facing enormous crises, climate change, issues of environmental justice, extractivism and exploitation, crises that span an entire world and touch billions and billions of people. And we can't even imagine how to begin tackling these problems if we don't first take the time to come together, to share our stories, to listen to one another, to build community, and to think about how we can act from the bottom up. So first off, I just want to thank everybody for taking that time. Now, Amherst might seem like one drop in a bucket, but for all of us here, the decarbonization of our campus is the largest lever that we can pull. The issue is that, as many of our speakers were saying, a lot of us here don't know how we can possibly engage on these issues of such a large scale. So if we can engage in this decarbonization, not just as an infrastructural process, but bringing students into it and inspiring and empowering us, it will be a very important step forward. And as we've seen, as other people have mentioned as well, the UN has said, the UN IPCC report, that we have 12 years left if we're going to have any possible chance of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, curtailing the worst effects of global warming on our entire world. So, and our climate action plan, as we've heard, has called for decarbonization by the year 2035, which is clearly a little bit too late. And we have to be in this area because we have the resources and ability with our extended community, all of our alumni, our board of trustees, and our donors, our administrators. All of us together have the ability and resources to get this done before 2030. And so we must be leaders and do that because we have the ability and the responsibility to do so. So with that, please do sign the petition. So far we have 550 students who've signed the petition saying we have to get this done. We can always use more signatures. We also have, if you want to stay in the loop, there's an email listserv. You can sign up there, and we'll be in touch. I think we're good. Thank you again so much for coming and spending this time.